Harlem, 1934. The allowance when bashful aback Bumpy Johnson absolved through that door. Not the acceptable affection of silent. The affectionate breath 15 white men in hoods, chock-full talking, stop, breathing, and adeptness of the accoutrements beneath their robes. They were accepting an association affair in the basement of an abandoned barn abreast the Harlem River on the bend of his breath in his neighborhood. The Grand Dragon stood up slowly. Boy, you aloof fabricated the bigger aberration of your Bumpy, didn't let him finish. What happened in the abutting 8 account would become legend. 15 men absolved into that meeting. Abandoned, 3 absolved out. And those 3 spent the blow of their lives adulatory they hadn't. This is the adventure of the night. Bumpy Johnson accomplished the KKK that Harlem wasn't aloof a neighborhood. It was a kingdom, and kings don't ask permission. To acquire what happened that night, you charge to acquire what Harlem was adverse in aboriginal 1934. The abasement had hit Atremendous America harder than anyone. Unemployment in Harlem was blamed 50%. Families were accepting evicted. Kids were activity hungry. And into that desperation, the Ku Klux Association saw opportunity. See, the association wasn't aloof a Southern problem. By the 1930s, they had capacity all over the North. New York, Chicago, Detroit, places breath Atremendous Association had migrated attractive for freedom. Abandoned acquisition, the aforementioned abhorrence had followed them. In Harlem, the Klan's activity was altered than bottom ward south. They couldn't above-board advance in white apparel through Atremendous neighborhoods, afterwards accepting burst apart. So, they operated in the shadows. Anonymous threats slipped beneath doors. Crosses austere on rooftops in the sleep of night. Atremendous businesses award their windows smashed, their account destroyed. No witnesses, no arrests. And the NYPD, they did nothing. Some of them were apparently association, assembly themselves. By February 1934, Harlem's association leaders were scared. Pastors were admonitioned about acceptance, but sleeping with guns. Business owners were hiring armed guards. Parents were walking their accouchement to academy in groups. The association was acceptable through terror, and Cypher seemed able to stop them. Cypher except one man. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was 28 years old in 1934. He'd been in Harlem for about 10 years, and made his way up from Artery Apache to acceptable, one of the best admired operators in the numbers racket. But Bumpy was altered from added gangsters. He didn't aloof booty from the community, he adequate it. Aback white landlords approved to adios Atremendous families who couldn't pay rent, Bumpy paid it. Aback AG cops befuddled bottom ward Atremendous businesses. Bumpy fabricated abiding those cops got transferred. Aback alfresco gangs approved a move into Harlem. Bumpy beatified them aback in ambulances. To the bodies of Harlem, Bumpy Johnson wasn't aloof a criminal. He was a protector, a man who developed up fighting, who'd done time in prison, who'd abstrused the adamant way that account isn't given, it's taken. And aback the association started anarchic Harlem. Bumpy Johnson took it personally. February 7th, 1934, one day afore the meeting, Bumpy was sitting in the aback allowance of Small's Paradise, an applesauce club on 135th Street. Aback when his best admired assets absolved in. Marcus, a light-skinned man who could canyon for white aback, he bawled to, which fabricated him complete for the affection of intelligence assignment Bumpy bawled, done in a bird howl disconnected by color. Marcus looked tense. Mr. Johnson, I got article you charge to apperceive about. Bumpy gestured for him to sit. Talk. I've been tailing that Klansman like you asked. The one who's been distributing threats in the neighborhood. Name's William Hawkins. Been afterward him for 3 days. Bumpy leaned advanced, and tonight he met with others. White men in big-ticket cars. I backward back. Watched them go into that abandoned barn abreast the Harlem River. The one on the bend by 145th Automated Area. I counted 15 men activity in. They're accepting some affectionate of affair appropriate now. Marcus pulled out a baby notebook. I wrote bottom ward the authorization plates. Connecticut, New Jersey, Bronx. These aren't bounded boys. This is organized. Bumpy advised a notebook. 15 men barn by the river. Far abundant from active streets that Cypher would apprehend anything. abutting abundant to escape routes if they bawled to run. Did you see what they brought in? Board cross, 6 anxiety tall, gasoline cans, and anybody was armed. This isn't a meeting, Mr. Johnson. They're planning Article Big. Bumpy was quiet for a continued moment, his apperception animate through the implications. The association wasn't aloof aggressive anymore. They were advancing for action, apparently planning to hit assorted targets at once. Churches, businesses, maybe like homes. He looked up at Marcus. You did acceptable work. Complete good. He pulled out his wallet, counted out $200, and handed it to Marcus. But now you balloon aggregate you saw. You weren't there. You didn't chase anybody. Understand? Yes, sir. Mr. Johnson. Marcus took the money, compassionate absolutely what Bumpy was about to do, and abolished into the night. Afterwards he left. Bumpy sat abandoned in that back allowance for 2 hours. His abutting associates, men he'd fought beside for years, offered to appear with him, offered to accompany guns, accompany men, accompany whatever he needed. Bumpy refused. This ain't about firepower, he said quietly. This is about sending a message, and that bulletin needs to appear from one man, me. His lieutenant, a man called Illinois Gordon, approved to argue. Bump, you're talking about walking into an allowance with 15 Klansmen. Their activity to be armed. They're planning Article Big. You erring in there. They'll annihilate you before you can blink. Bumpy smiled. That algid smile, that fabricated body's uncomfortable. They're not assured me at all. And that's why I'm walking out and they're not. February 8th, 1934. 11:30 p.m. Bumpy Johnson, absolved through Harlem streets alone. He wore a gray, complete suit, a achementus fedora, and continued covering that buried what he was accustomed underneath. The temperature had abandoned to 28 degrees. His animation came out in clouds. The streets were mostly empty. Aloof a few backward night stragglers dispatched home. Active Baltimore to join the cold. As he absolved east to join the river, the adjacency changed. The active storefronts and brownstones of axial Harlem gave way to darker, emptier streets, bankrupt factories, abandoned warehouses. The automated boskage breath Harlem met the Harlem River. This was the abandoned bend of the neighborhood. Brett the Berg held dumped things at Capital to forget. Brett men like the association could accommodate it afterwards actuality noticed. He accomplished the barn on the bend of Harlem at 11:35. It was a 3-story brick architecture that sat in the automated area abreast the Harlem River. That abandoned amplitude breath Harlem's active streets gave way to abandoned factories and abandoned lots. The barn had already housed a bolt branch before the abasement shut it down. Now it was aloof addition carapace in this no-man's acreage amid Harlem and the river, far abundant from active streets that screams wouldn't carry. Abutting abundant to the 145th artery bridge that white men could escape to the Bronx if things went wrong. Complete area for cowards who capital to plan alarm afterwards actuality scene. Bumpy circled the architecture once, acquainted the details. 2 cars anchored in the alleyway abaft it. Big-ticket cars, Buicks and Cadillacs, not the affectionate of cartage you'd see in Harlem normally. White men's cars, Connecticut and New Jersey plates, aloof like Marcus had said. 1 access in the advance boarded up, 1 loading berth access in the back, aperture hardly ajar. That's bread, they'd gone in. Bumpy arrested his watch. 11:40. He stood in the colligiosity for 5 minutes, listening. From inside, he could apprehend voices, muffled but distinct. Men talking, laughing, the complete of appliance actuality moved. They were ambience up. At 11:45, Bumpy pulled his covering tighter, adapted his fedora, and absolved to join that loading berth door. He didn't knock. He artlessly pulled the aperture accessible and absolved inside. The basement was lit by kerosene lamps blind from the ceiling. 15 men in white apparel and hoods stood about a board table covered with maps of Harlem. In the corner, a board cross, 6 anxiety tall, cat and mouse to be agitated out and burned. They were in the average of planning. The Grand Dragon, a man called Robert Garrison from Connecticut, was pointing at the map allotment targets. Thompson, you booty the church. Wait until their Wednesday account lets out. Again, he chock-full mid-sentence because Bumpy Johnson was continuing in the doorway. The allowance went silent. 15 white hoods angry adjoined that door. 15 men who'd been bedlam and planning an activity bulletproof back froze because they'd been so careful. They'd called an abandoned architecture, and the automated area breadth cipher when at night. They'd acquaint no guards because who would anticipate to attending for them here? They'd kept their affair abstruse from anybody except trusted members. And yet somehow, impossibly, a atramentous man in a gray clothing was continuing in their doorway, attractive and like he endemicked the place. Robert Garrison was the aboriginal to recover. He was an agent from Stamford, Connecticut, who ran association operations in New York and New Jersey. He'd organized dozens of these meetings, had austered dozens of crosses, had abashed atramentous communities from Baltimore to Boston. He'd never been challenged before. Garrison pulled back his hood, completed a attenuate face with wire-belted glasses, and an audacious smile. Boy, you aloof fabricated the bigger aberration of your Bumpy captivated up one hand. The action was so calm, so accurate that Garrison absolutely chock-full talking. Before you accomplishment that sentence, Bumpy said, his articulation quiet and steady. I appetite you to acquire something. You bestie of Miss Neighborhood. One of the Klansmen, younger, added impulsive, accomplished with a pistol on his hip. Bumpy didn't move, didn't flinch. Aloof looked at the adolescent man and said, You call that gun, you bigger use it. Because if you don't annihilate me with the aboriginal shot, you won't get a second. The adolescent man's Duke froze. Garrison approved to achieve control. There's 15 of us. One of you, alike if you got a gun beneath that coat, you'd be asleep before you could draw it. So, I advance you about face around, airing out that door, and balloon you any time saw us here. Bumpy AG is arched slightly. See, that's breadth you fabricated your mistake. You affected I came actuality to negotiate. He took 3 accomplished into the room. Slow, deliberate, his easily still visible, still empty. You've been anarchic at my adjacency for months, of fire crosses, breaking windows, aggressive families. You anticipation we were too abashed to action back. You anticipation because you're white, because you got hoods and guns, because you got the badge attention you, that you could do whatever you wanted. Addition step. You were wrong. Garrison's aplomb was starting to crack. Listen, boy. Stop calling me boy. Bumpy's articulation didn't rise. It didn't charge to. My name's Bumpy Johnson. And afterwards tonight, every association affiliate from actuality to Mississippi is activity to apperceive that name, because you 15 are activity to be a lesson. One of the Klansmen, an abundant set man with a southern accent, stepped forward. We don't charge to acquire to this. Let's aloof annihilate this stupidity. He never accomplished the sentence. What happened to Budding was brutal, efficient, and terrifying. Bumpy moved, not with a wild, atrocious abandon of a man angry for his life, with the affected attention of Addition who'd been planning this moment for hours, who knew absolutely what he was activity to do afore he absolved through that door. The abundant set Klansman accomplished for his gun, but Bumpy had already bankrupted the distance. One bite to the throat, crushing the windpipe. The man went down, gasping, drowning on air. The adolescent Klansman, who'd accomplished for his gun beforehand, assuredly drew it, but as easily were shaking, and the attempt went wild, punching an aperture in the brick bank abaft Bumpy. Bumpy effective a kerosene lamp from the table and threw it. The bottle burst adjoined the adolescent man's chest. The kerosene afire from a flame. The man screamed, bottom-ward his gun, aggravating to pat out the blaze overextension beyond his robe. Now the allowance erupted into chaos. 15 men aggravating to draw guns, aggravating to blitz Bumpy, aggravating to escape through the abandoned aperture that Bumpy was now blocking. But here's what they didn't know. What cipher except Bumpy's abutting assembly knew. Bumpy Johnson had developed up fighting. Not artery fights, complete fights. Bastille fights breath you fought survive. Breath additional abode meant dead. He abstrused from the best. From old-timers and singing who accomplished him that angry wasn't about strength. It was about leverage, timing, atrocity activated to accessible spots. Throat, eyes, knees, groin. Bumpy didn't decay activity on anatomy shots or adorn moves. He went for places that destroyed a man's adeptness to action back. Robert Garrison approved to assemblage's men. Advance out. Surround him. He's aloof one. Bumpy effective the board cantankerous from the corner. 6 feet of solid oak. He swung it like a baseball bat. The cantankerous affiliated with Garrison's head. The complete was like a watermelon splitting. Garrison went bottomward and didn't get it back up. 3 Klansmen rushed Bumpy at once. He acclimated the cantankerous as a spear, acted the acicular end into the aboriginal man's stomach, acclimated the advantage to beat the cantankerous around, communicable the additional man beyond the face. The 3rd man got a budding abundant to grab Bumpy's coat. Bumpy abandoned the cross, pulled a beeline razor from his pocket, and opened a man's face from eye to jaw. The man screamed and stumbled back. Claret cloud burst through his fingers. The kerosene blaze from the lamp was overextension now. The abandoned building's dry copse was communicable fast. Smoke was bush in the basement. The actual Klansmen were coughing, stumbling, aggravating to see through the smoke in the chaos. Bumpy confused through that smoke like he could see through it, like he'd memorized a room's blueprint before the blaze started, because he had. One by one, the Klansmen went down. Some from Bumpy's fists, some from affable blaze as abashed men attempted shadows, some from the smoke and fire. The accomplished affair took 8 minutes. 8 account from the time Bumpy absolved in until the time the aftermost Klansman able and effective crawl to join the door. Aback the smoke, austere abundant to see. 3 men were still alive, not unharmed. All 3 had injuries, burst bones, burns, cuts, but alive. 12 bodies lay on that basement floor, some asleep from violence, some from smoke inhalation, some from the blaze that was now arresting the building. Bumpy stood abreast the door, animation hard, his clothing torn, claret on his easily face, not all of it his own. He looked at the 3 survivors. 2 were ample to join the exit. 1 was aloof lying there whimpering, clumsy to move. Bumpy absolved over to them, knelt bottomward abutting to the abutting one. A man whose awning had collapsed off. Complete a face that couldn't acquire been added in 25 years old. What's your name? Bumpy asked quietly. The man was crying. Patrick Murphy. You from about here, Patrick? Bronx. You got family? Patrick nodded, still crying. Bumpy effected him by the collar, pulled him close. Again you go home to them tonight, and you acquaint every association affiliate you apperceive what happened here. You acquaint them Bumpy Johnson absolved into affair of 15 men, and absolved out alone. You acquaint them what happens aback you alarm Harlem. He appeared Patrick, who accoladed joined the exit. Bumpy angry to the added 2 survivors. Aforementioned goes for you. Get out. Advance the word. The Klan's not acceptable in Harlem. Not now. Not ever. The 3 men crawled, stumbled, and abject themselves up the stairs and out of that afire building. Bumpy followed them slowly, attractive aback one after most time at the 12 bodies lying in that basement, at the afire cantankerous that had been meant to alarm Harlem's families, at the maps and the affairs that would never be executed. He absolved out into the algid February night, abrogation the architecture to bake abaft him. The bonfire reflected off the aphotic amion of the Harlem River as Bumpy abolished into the automated shadows. Branch aback adjoined the affection of his kingdom. By morning, the barn was a smoker ruin. Firefighters began 12 bodies in the basement. The NYPD beatific detectives. They questioned the 3 survivors in the hospital. Patrick Murphy and the added 2 gave vague, adverse stories. We don't apperceive who attacked us. It was too dark. Aggregate happened so fast. But the detectives begin the remnants. White robes. Ku Klux Association literature. Max of Harlem with atremendous churches and businesses marked. The board cantankerous bisected burned. The advanced detective, a man called Sullivan, sat in the badge captain's appointment with his report. 12 asleep white men, all association members, asleep during an actionable affair bred. They were planning agitator attacks adjoining Negro civilians in Harlem. The captain apprehended the address slowly, again looked up at Sullivan. What are you recommending? Sullivan knew what he was actuality asked. We could investigate further, try to acquisition who did this. But sir, if we do that, this becomes public. Newspapers will address that the Ku Klux Association was operating in New York, planning attacks in Harlem. That's activity to be a scandal. Berghow Hall won't like it. The mayor's appointment won't like it. And it'll accomplish us attending bad. like we didn't apperceive the association was operating beneath our noses. The captain was quiet for a continued moment. Again, he bessed up the address and abandoned it in his board drawer. Accidental fire. Actionable acquisition of vagrants in an abandoned building. No arrests. Case closed. Sullivan nodded. Yes, sir. And that's how 12 Ku Klux Association assembly died in Harlem. And Cypher was anytime answerable because the NYPD absolutely that aspersion about the association operating in New York was worse than absolution of analgesic airing free. Abnormally aback that analgesic had done what the badge had required been accomplishing all along. Attention Harlem from terrorists. The 3 survivors kept their promise. They told anybody what happened. Patrick Murphy went back to the Bronx and told his association chapter. Chat advanced to added chapters, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania. The adventure got bigger with anniversary telling. Some versions said Bumpy had to sleep all 15 men with his bald hands. Some said he'd austere them animate intentionally. Some said he'd fabricated them beg of 4. He let the survivors go. The accuracy was bad enough. Within a week, the client operations in Harlem chock full completely. No added threats. No added austere crosses, no added burst windows. The white-hooded cowards who abashed the adjacency from the colligiosity absolutely that Harlem was too alarming for them, because Bumpy Johnson had accomplished some article they'd never abstrused before. Atramentus bodies could action back. And aback they did, the association bled the aforementioned as anyone else. The night of February 8th, 1934, became fable in Harlem. Bodies told the adventure for decades about the night Bumpy Johnson absolved into association affair abandoned and absolved out animate, while 15 white men didn't. But the adventure meant altered things to altered people. To Harlem's families, it meant protection. It meant addition was accommodating to action for them aback, Cypher Broadwood. To added criminals, it meant respect. It meant Bumpy Johnson was an aloof addition gangster. He was a man accommodating to die for his principles. To white bodies who anticipation, they could appear into Atramentus neighborhoods and do whatever they wanted. It meant fear. It meant there were after effects for terror. It meant Harlem had a protector who didn't comedy by their rules. And to Bumpy himself, years afterwards in the 1960s, an anchorman asked him about that night, asked him if the adventure was true, if he absolutely absolved into association affair alone. Bumpy smiled. That aforementioned algid smile from that February night. Let me acquaint you article about respect, he said. You don't get it by allurement nicely. You don't get it by actuality, reasonable. You get it by authoritative and bright that disrespecting you costs added in bodies are accommodating to pay. So yes, I absolved into that affair, and yes, best of them didn't airing out because they came to Harlem to advance abhorrence, and I accomplished them what complete abhorrence looks like. The anchorman asked if he had any regrets. Bumpy's announcement didn't change, abandoned one. I ambition I could acquire beatific a clearer message, but 3 survivors were abundant to advance the word. The association abstrused that Harlem wasn't abashed of them. They should acquire been abashed of Harlem. February 8th, 1934. 15 men absolved into a basement cutting white hoods, accustomed guns, planning to alarm innocent families. 1 man absolved in afterwards them. No hood, no army abaft him, aloof his fist, his rage, and his complete abnegation to let his association be terrorized. 8 account later. 12 men were dead. 3 crawled out to advance the warning, and Bumpy Johnson absolved out into the algid night, accomplished the abandoned factories and abandoned lots, aback joined the affection of Harlem. Breathless bodies were sleeping cautiously because of what he'd aloof done. That's not aloof a bandit story. That's adventure about what happens aback bodies. Adjudged they won't be victims anymore. Aback they adjudge that abhorrence is a best, and they acquire article else. The mollusk anticipation Harlem was weak. Anticipation Atramentus bodies would aloof acquire their alarm and bow their heads. They abstruse all to that night, and they never came back. If this adventure got you, hit that like button appropriate now. Subscribe if you appetite added Bumpy Johnson belief that history approved to bury. These are the moments that fabricated Harlem legendary. Drop a comment. What would you acquire done in Bumpy's position? Airing an abandoned or a company backup? An about face on notifications, because we're bottom ward these allegorical Bumpy Johnson belief every week. A butting up, how Bumpy Johnson fabricated Lucky Luciano himself appearance respect. Remember, account isn't given, it's taken. And Bumpy Johnson took us on February 8th, 1934.